Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome. As we reach the culmination of the 18-day campaign to end violence against women, welcome and thank you for joining us at today's talk called Stop Domestic Violence virtual event. This is co-hosted by the Philippine Embassy in the United States and the Filipino Young Leaders Program, FYLPRO. I am Dr. Joyce Javier, an associate professor of clinical pediatrics at Children's Hospital Los Angeles and the University of California Keck School of Medicine. I serve as both a pediatrician and physician scientist, where my research over the past 16 years has focused on optimizing the well-being of Filipino American families. On a personal note, I'm also honored to serve as a senior advisor for the FYLPRO Caretaker Project. I'm honored to be your moderator today in support of the 18-day campaign, which is part of the Philippine government's goal of protecting the human rights of women and girls and addressing all forms of gender-based violence as declared in the 1987 Constitution. Today, we will hear from a variety of experts and perspectives on the topic of domestic violence, including survivor stories and understanding domestic violence and red flags, the legal perspective, and what you should know about your rights if you are a victim of domestic violence, and the mental health perspective and how domestic violence impacts not only the victim, but the family and network, and what we can do to better support victims and prevent domestic violence. A couple of housekeeping items. If you are in Zoom, please mute your microphone if you are not speaking. And please feel free to type any questions at any point during the event in the chat box or live stream. We will try to answer all questions at the end. To help us kick off, please welcome Mr. Joshua Ong Price, current FYLPRO president and first Filipino American, Asian American elected official in Pulaski County, Arkansas.
Well, thank you so much, Joyce, and mabuhay to everyone out there. Again, my name is Joshua Ong Price. I'm the 2020 president of FYLPRO. But more than that, and why I'm so pleased to be part of this panel discussion today is that I am also a survivor of domestic violence. So I don't want to get too far into it, but I think it's important for us to share our stories. So briefly, my mother moved to the US in 1975 from the Philippines, and she married my father within about a year. However, after a few years of being married, she decided that they wanted to separate and kind of see what else was out there. And unfortunately, she found the wrong man. This man was physically and mentally abusive to the point where he threatened both myself and my sister and my mother with firearms and gun violence as well. However, that being said, my mother, being a registered nurse, as many Filipino Americans were, was financially independent, and she was able to escape from that situation and use her skills as a nurse to kind of navigate myself and my sister through that experience. So again, I'm very glad to be part of this important event. And I just want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their stories and expertise. And I truly hope that this discussion will help women in similar situations find the courage and the resources to get out of those and find themselves in a better place. So thank you so much for all the panelists for being here. And thank you to the embassy, and thank you to everyone who's watching. And now we have a few words from the Philippine Ambassador to the United States, Jose Manuel Romualdez, on behalf of the Philippine Embassy and Consulate General in the US.
Greetings of peace and continued good health from Washington, D.C. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this important webinar that aims to arm fellow Filipinos in the United States and Caribbean with information and resources to protect themselves and their loved ones against domestic violence. Domestic violence is usually the abuse of a spouse or a partner in a domestic setting. Such violence is experienced by more than 10 million women and men in the United States every year. This number includes Filipinos and Filipino Americans who seek assistance and support from the Philippine Embassy and Consulates General. According to the initial data collected by the United Nations, the pandemic is driving up domestic violence cases rendering women and children more vulnerable to physical, psychological, and other forms of abuse inside their homes. Therefore, the Philippine Embassy is grateful for the opportunity to work with FYLPRO in organizing this virtual program that is in line with the Philippines' 18-day campaign to end violence against women, or VAW, which is held annually from November 25 to December 12. I wish to express my appreciation to Ms. Christine Lee, Attorney Joyce King, Ms. Ana Jayme, and Dr. Joyce Javier for being with us today to share their experiences, perspectives, and expertise in dealing with domestic violence. I also would like to thank FYLPRO for incorporating the 18-day campaign in its Tayo Caretaker project. As the international community marks Human Rights Day, December 10, let us be resolved in our commitment to stopping domestic violence and ending the violence of the rights and dignities of anyone who is forced to endure such experience. We must do our part in ensuring that all of us, regardless of gender, ethnicity, social status, and creed, live in a world free of discrimination and violence. Thank you, and stay well.
Before we introduce our first speaker, we'd like to show a brief video introduction on raising awareness of domestic violence and one survivor's story.
At first, he was so charismatic, and that's what drew me in. We just had this instant connection. I felt like someone finally understood me. There was a lot of verbal and emotional abuse going on now that I look back on it. He would start calling me names and calling me things when he was upset. But I kept letting that go because I did want to believe that it was me. That if I fixed this aspect about myself, he would be the Prince Charming that I originally met. This one night was a night when I could no longer deny that there was something horrible happening. We went on a date. We came back. We had a great time. He asked me to do something, and I didn't do it. And out of nowhere, I got a punch in my face. He's never hit me before, so this was the first time that I actually felt physical pain from him directly. He punched me. After that, I don't know how many times. He threw me onto the floor and he pinned me with his body. And then he proceeded to punch my face with both of his fists. I was completely in shock, so I couldn't even react. I think the only words that came out at that time was, "What are you doing? Oh my gosh, what are you doing?" To which he continuously punched me to the point that I lost consciousness multiple times. He choked me at one point to the point that I thought I was going to stop breathing. He let go just in time, and he really liked to watch me beg him to stop. I, to this day, don't know how not doing one thing he asked me to do could lead to all of that violence. Can you imagine having to pick up the phone, having to call my aunt and saying, "Something really bad has happened. Can you please come and get me?" She dropped everything at work, came, helped me pack up my things, and we drove out of there. This is still very much a hush-hush topic in our family. They don't understand why I'm still talking about this. I look normal again now. I'm able to find new love. I'm able to find new life. I'm able to find a new career. So why am I still talking about this? It's a disgrace to my new family to be. It's a disgrace to my current family. So will you just stop now? The thing is, I don't enjoy talking about this. I really don't like it because every time I talk about it, I'm re-traumatizing myself. I'd rather not talk about it. But then, is there anyone else out there that's going to talk about this?
Having somebody who's able to share her story the way that Christine has, it makes a huge difference. In many Asian cultures, it's such a taboo topic. I'm one of the Mandarin speakers on our staff, and something I often hear from my Mandarin-speaking clients is "家丑不可外扬." Don't air your dirty laundry, I suppose would be the English equivalent. For so many people who've been victimized by violence, they're the ones who are left with all this shame. Center for the Pacific Asian Family was founded by a Filipina. Her name was Nilda Ramonte. She saw a need for API-specific services for domestic violence and sexual assault.
In Asian communities, there's a lot of violence that transpires in intimate relationships, also in parenting, and those things have been accepted. Unfortunately, with thousands upon thousands of calls each year, violence is still happening, and it's still prevalent, and it's still pervasive. There needs to be more conversation about what's happening to a generation of women and children.
Talking about domestic violence is really hard. I mean, it's really hard in mainstream America, so I can only imagine how much harder it is for a group that's so marginalized. And I think that talking about domestic violence is hard because we don't talk about healthy relationships. I think fixing the situation means education. If I had maybe education on healthy relationships and healthy sex, then there might have been times that even I would have engaged in a more healthy manner. And so I know how important it is for someone growing up in America, and I want to give that back to the youth.
What we really need are more survivors sharing their story, because they're the real experts in this. There's so much more to a survivor of domestic violence than just this terrible thing that happened. For Christine to be sharing her story, she is living proof that there is life after abuse.
I think the road to recovery is going to be a lifelong thing because you have your good days, you have your good weeks, you have your good months sometimes. But then something triggers and you go back down a route that you don't want to go back down. I'd like to do less of this work if I can, because I'm hoping other people hearing this will resonate with my message or at least feel empowered to step away from it. And I'm hoping that more people will talk about it so that it's not such a taboo topic anymore.
We'd like to thank Christine for this powerful message, and we're so grateful to have her with us here today. Christine Lee is an Emmy-nominated storyteller with over 10 years of professional work experience as a TV journalist. She is the president and CEO of Kimbap TV, LLC. Christine enjoyed a long career with NBC as a local news reporter in Dallas, Flagstaff, and Phoenix. She currently lives in Southern California and is surviving COVID by sharing uplifting videos featuring small businesses and empowering women, especially fellow domestic violence survivors, through personal storytelling. She can also be seen anchoring Torrance City Cable's COVID-19 Today and hosting segments for Weekends in Torrance. Welcome, Christine.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Gosh, it's been a few years now since we made this video, but it still feels like it was yesterday. And everything I shared, it still holds true. I mean, shortly after releasing this, I got married to the guy you saw. He is the polar opposite of my abuser. And I stepped away from nonprofit work, largely because my family, as you heard, asked me to try something different. They wanted my new life with my husband to not involve this somewhat shameful past. And I too, at the time, wanted a clean start, and I didn't want to dwell on something that was so heavy in my life. The more I tried to step away, though, the more I came across people who needed my help. For example, my church pastor shared my story, and because of it, people started coming to him asking for help. And he passed along those people to me because he just felt like I could provide that personal touch and be there for them in ways that no one else can. I was also a part of a Bible study fellowship. And I remember this one day, this lady came up to me after class and she waited for me at my car. And she was crying and she asked me to pray with her and to help her because her best friend was in a very abusive relationship and she didn't know what to do. People kept coming into my path and I realized that, you know what, I can't ignore it. So I started a YouTube video series this year using my personal experiences to try to empower other survivors and their loved ones. I acknowledge that whether I like it or not, this title of domestic violence survivor is a lifelong one. Once I embraced this fact, my life suddenly had more meaning and purpose. So now I'm thankful every time I have an opportunity like this to be able to work alongside others and help raise awareness about this very important and sensitive topic. During COVID-19, I cringe every time I see a news report about domestic violence cases rising as a result of this pandemic. So I reached out to my friends who work in nonprofits, law enforcement agencies across the country, and I got some better insight into what reality looks like for a lot of their clients and the people that they're trying to help. So yeah, cases are rising, but they're not always documented accurately via the rising number of calls. A couple of places reported seeing call volumes up by like 20%, but that's really not an accurate representation of how many DV cases are actually on the rise because many people just don't reach out. They don't feel comfortable and they don't feel safe. Here are some things I was made aware of while speaking with some nonprofits throughout the US. Many of those experiencing domestic violence during the coronavirus, they live in small places like one-bedroom apartments. Unfortunately, many abusers or the victim survivors lost their jobs. And so that means a lot more time in their homes, oftentimes in these closed quarters, small spaces. As you can imagine, the loss of a job, and on top of that, the inability to go out to a gym or other places where you can release that stress, right? It can all build up inside the home, increasing the likelihood of violence. Some victims slash survivors have said it's difficult to call a hotline because the abuser is always there. And so in some cases, I've heard of DV advocates, domestic violence advocates, who would work it out with their clients. So they would meet them at a market. It's an essential task, right? So they're there for a very short period of time just to be able to hand off some information or to talk with them for just that short period of time. I interviewed a police detective here in my hometown, and he said calls didn't really rise that much. It's nothing that's noticeable, but he was very much aware of everything I've just shared with you. And he stressed the importance of people caring for each other during this time, especially if you're neighbors with someone that you think might be in an abusive relationship, to reach out on their behalf. He said, you might not actually realize that you're helping as much as you are by looking out for your neighbor or coworker or loved one. And it's not to create more problems for them and make things worse. It's truly trying to get some help for them. And it might not be the most comfortable thing to do, but especially when there's kids involved, I think that making those calls to the police or to whoever to get help, it's huge. Police usually get calls relating to domestic violence when an abusive incident turns violent. I've covered countless stories over the years as a TV news reporter on homicides, murder, suicides, things like that. So even I initially thought that domestic violence just meant extreme physical assaults. But when I reflect on my past relationship with my abuser, I know it was much more than that. Yes, it was the physical assault that made me finally leave. And that's what prompted that call to the police. But months led up to that incident. And in many cases, victim survivors experience years of abuse. That's more than just physical violence. Domestic violence encompasses a wide range of abusive behaviors. In my case, like I said in the video, it started out like emotional, psychological, verbal abuse, right? I also experienced willful intimidation, sexual assault, and threats. But all of these weren't as black and white to me as the physical abuse was. So I would doubt myself, make excuses for my abuser, or truly believe what my abuser told me, that I deserved to be treated that way. You may have also noticed that I use two terms when referring to people who experience domestic violence: victim and survivor. To me, it's really important that I embrace both titles. Victim means that I was harmed, injured as a result of a crime. I will forever be a victim of crime because my abuser caused me intentional harm and injury, especially on that night when he had me endure countless bruises and contusions. But it's also important that I didn't keep a victim mentality for the rest of my life, because then how would I move on, right? So I started to understand that I survived that relationship, and I was fortunate enough to have this second chance at life that is way happier and way safer. And while receiving counseling from a nonprofit, and as well as through seeing my therapist, I learned what it means to be a survivor and why that was so powerful. Having a survivor mindset to me means rebuilding my life that is free from violence, recognizing red flags, and empowering others to a much healthier life. Many abusers share common characteristics. Here are some subtle warning signs or red flags that I came across. First, he insisted on moving really quickly into a very deeply committed relationship. He was also very charming and seemed too good to be true, like a Prince Charming. He got extremely controlling or jealous. He had a really bad temper and blew up in both private and public places. He didn't take responsibility for his actions and constantly blamed myself or others. He often disrespected me and talked negatively about my friends or even my family members behind their backs. His words didn't match his actions, and he isolated me from my family and friends. Isolation is a huge part of domestic violence and the reason why so many people don't reach out for help. My mom and one of my aunts actually mailed me a letter, each of them, threatening to cut ties with me if I continued on with this relationship, because they saw from their perspective how unhealthy this relationship was. And I was super close to my family. Once I became detached from most of the people who really cared about me, it became increasingly difficult for me to reach out for help. Luckily, I still had a few friends that I could text, especially towards the latter part of this relationship when there were some violent incidents. And I understand that many people don't have that, especially those who are coming from another country. So if you or someone you know doesn't have family, friends, church members, coworkers, anybody in your local area to reach out to, there are nonprofits out there with 24-hour hotlines, sometimes multilingual ones. Domestic violence hotlines across the country receive a total of about 20,000 hotline calls every day, but that's just a small amount of those who are being abused and need help. Shame and stigma discourage so many people from telling anybody about what they are experiencing. But I think events like this help to dispel that sense of shame and let people know it's okay and that they're not alone. So I hope this helps and gives you a better insight into what domestic violence looks like, especially from my perspective. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you, Christine. As Christine mentioned, navigating the legal aspects of domestic violence can be confusing. And we have here with us today Joyce King, Chief Counsel at the Frederick County State's Attorney's Office, to help us understand the rights of victims and what to expect. She is cross-designated as a Special Assistant United States Attorney for the Department of Justice, Project Safe Childhood. She serves on the Maryland Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and serves as a board member for the National District Attorneys Association Digital Safety Advisory Board. In 2019, Ms. King was selected for the Filipino Young Leaders Program and has since started her own 501c3 project, Ligtas Bata, to combat internet child exploitation in the Philippines.
Hi, good evening, and thank you so much for having me and for that warm introduction. I'm so privileged to be a part of this panel and this program for such an important topic of domestic violence. So today I'm going to cover, or just at first a little bit about myself. I've been a prosecutor here in the state of Maryland for 7 years, and I have prosecuted domestic violence cases as well. In more recent years, I've moved to the policy side of advocating and lobbying for domestic violence legislation before the legislature here in Maryland. And I'll cover some of the topics that we've advocated for a little later. Let me share my screen. So today we're covering, the section that I'm covering is Know Your Rights and What You Should Know When Seeking Legal Assistance. And as Christine talked about so heroically, the difficulty of navigating the legal process in the United States can be overwhelming and sometimes such a cumbersome process that many people don't want to come forward. So there are some fundamental rights regardless of your immigration and citizenship status. You have a right to obtain a protective order. You have the right to be legally separated or divorced. You have the right to share certain marital property. You have the right to ask for custody of your children. These are things that you're protected by under civil law. For crime victim rights, as Christine had described, regardless of your immigration or citizenship status, you have a right to call the police for help to obtain a protection order. As a prosecutor, our perspective obviously is to always call, if possible, 911 if you or your children are in danger. We believe that reporting your injuries and any physical contact is so imperative and life-saving. If you're a victim of domestic violence, you can apply for a court order. So court-issued protection orders, or you might know them as restraining orders, the laws vary state to state. However, every state has a legal process of which you can obtain a legal document that prevents your abuser from coming close or near, making contact with you, your children, your family. That's not just physical contact, that can be also a location. They can't come near your location. Likewise, if your abuser accuses you of a crime, you have basic legal rights, regardless of your immigration status, to talk to a lawyer, to not answer any questions without that lawyer being present, and to obtaining legal counsel, for the protection of your rights. So I know, I think preliminarily we got some questions that I wanted to try to address early on regarding immigration rights. Many Filipino Americans here in the United States with fiance visas or different types of visas may feel afraid or uncomfortable of coming forward and jeopardizing their legal status. If there are 3 ways that you can, if you are a victim of domestic violence, of immigration process that you can look into. One is the self-petition for legal status under the Violence Against Women Act. Second is cancellation of removal under the VAWA Act. And then third is the non-immigrant status, which are crime victims. So You definitely, and I have some contact numbers if you or your loved one want to consult an immigration lawyer how to best assist you to file this paperwork. And there's some great information, especially that distinguishes the immigration process from legal criminal process. Unlike legal criminal process, where you would have to physically come forward and either swear by written testimony before a judge or a court, or in open court testify as to what's happened to you, in the immigration process, these applications are by paper only, and they're not contingent on you having to file a police report. You can follow these protocols without having to deal with the police whatsoever. So why obtain legal assistance? Very much what Christine describes. I mean, this process can be very overwhelming. So every state has local and national resources of pro bono attorneys that will help you obtain, renew, enforce protective orders in court. They can help you secure child custody orders so that you can legally take your children away from the abusive parent or spouse, as well as providing legal guidance regarding your employment, financial, or housing problems. And hopefully every prosecutor's office in your state also has what's called a victim advocate, who is somebody who's designated to victims to, help you keep informed in the process of all the court proceedings, and to sit and walk you through your testimony and your participation with the justice system. So, the Office of Justice and Department of Justice found that by obtaining a protective order, you could save your life. It can absolutely, is one of the most effective ways, second to only leaving the abuser, that it can actually save your life. So I have a bunch of regional resources and national resources, and we'll make this available to all the participants. I'll also have these slides available to the participants. The other thing that I just wanted to touch upon, just because, as I mentioned about upcoming legislation, especially here in Maryland, and just some facts that are very important for those that might be in intimate partner violence, is regarding strangulation. The law and the criminal law has taken this very seriously, and in most, I think, 50 of the states now categorize this as a felony, because 1 in 4 women will experience intimate partner violence. And those that have been strangled, which is the obstruction of blood vessels in your throat, commonly known as, some people may say he choked me. The medical term and legal term that we use is strangulation, is that those that have been previously strangled, they have a 750% increase odds of being murdered by their abuser. So those are serious statistics that we have found. The loss of consciousness can take place with between 5 to 10 seconds. So if your abuser has strangled you, it is imperative that you are taking these actions seriously. Or if you've known someone who's been strangled, or somebody who their loved one has, or their abuser rather, has put their hands around their neck, that is something very severe, and we hope that you report it to your local law enforcement. And with that covers the legal resources, and I'll be open to questions and answers later on in the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce. So intimate partner violence doesn't just hurt the survivor, it hurts everyone. Here with us today is a dear friend and colleague, Anna J. Jayme, who will share with us resources for survivors, prevention strategies, and what allies can do to better support survivors. Anna J. is a California licensed marriage and family therapist who is a founding partner of Bridges to Healing Counseling and Training Center. She is trained as a California state certified domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking advocate, and has provided counseling to families and individuals who have suffered various kinds of trauma, including family violence, child abuse, and sexual assault. Currently, Anna J works as a program coordinator at Special Services for Groups, Asian Pacific Counseling and Treatment Centers. She also acts as a consultant and community liaison for Team Kapwa and the Filipino Family Health Initiative, an interdisciplinary team whose mission is to create a culture of mental health and healthy parenting in the Filipino community. Welcome, Anna J.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you to the audience. I'm also feel very privileged to be here. There's not a lot of time. I'm gonna go straight into it. So let me share my screen. Give me a second. Okay. So it was already mentioned in the introduction. Well, before I start, you know, we use IPV or intimate partner violence and domestic violence interchangeably, but it's important to note that, you know, this type of violence doesn't just happen in a marital context. It can happen, and it doesn't necessarily just happen with in a heterosexual relationship. It can also happen when you are young and a teenager. So it probably IPV is a more encompassing term. So that's how I'm going to refer to it moving forward. Another thing is I might be, because of the time, I might be going through a lot of what I'm sharing really quickly and might only touch lightly about on the things that you see on the screen. But really that's because I want to make sure there's a lot more time at the end for questions and answers discussion. There'll be ways for you to ask questions after this whole session is done. And if there's something in particular that you want to learn more about, you can get in touch with the organizers and we can share knowledge through them. So again, you know, IPV doesn't just hurt the survivor. It hurts everyone. You know, I think sometimes even the survivor themselves thinks I'm the only one that's getting hurt here. But really it doesn't. I mentioned already, earlier it was mentioned that children who witness this have a long-term impact. I already said, you know, teens, this happens early. As soon as you're having a relationship with somebody, then it can happen. But I think what people miss out how it might hurt the community is that whether you're a child, a teen, or adult victim, this does have a long-term impact on you. It will create a lot, not just of mental health issues, but because of that, if you've ever heard of adverse childhood experiences and how that impacts your actual health and then later your productivity. So if you think about it, that, you know, IPV really has an impact in the community because it increases crime, there will be higher healthcare, there's less productivity in the workforce, and so it hurts everybody. And so if we can agree, though, that IPV is harmful, why does it continue? Because it exists in a culture of silence. And so they talk about, oh, it's important to break the silence and share your stories, or listen to the stories. And I think part of what perpetuates this culture of silence or not talking about it is statements like this, like, oh, I should stay out of it. It's none of my business. You know, it's chismis to talk about it. Ay, nakakahiya, don't tell anyone about it. But then all that does is that it continues, you know, where nobody else can see it. It doesn't mean it stops. It just continues, and nobody's talking about it. So we have to think about, well, if it's happening, what stops survivors from getting help? And you might be surprised that you might unexpectedly be shutting down kind of calls for help. So an example, for example, an example would be maybe if you approach a priest or a member of clergy and they say, well, you know, men have different needs than women. Perhaps if you were more loving and supportive, your partner could express his emotions in a healthier way. Or you could approach your parent and they say, well, I can't believe you let these things get this bad. Like, I raised you to be smarter than this. A friend might say, well, that doesn't sound like him. Are you sure you're not just making this up because you're mad and you're trying to get back at him? Or worse, like the police might say, okay, ma'am, you need to calm down and quit getting hysterical or I'm going to have to arrest you too. So in the end, then the survivor has the abuser saying, see, I told you no one would believe you. Now you can never leave me. So how do we help then? And I think it's important to kind of change that mindset or change the conversation from asking the survivor, what is wrong with you, to what happened to you? It's understanding, not having judgment on why they might be staying, because you might be going, well, if that were me, I'd just leave. Why not? And I think there has to be more compassion and understanding about why they might stay. And some of these reasons could be the children. They might feel like, oh, the children will be emotionally damaged, or they could be harmed because, leaving actually escalates the violence, or a fear that they might lose custody of the children to the other parent, to the abuser. Economic factors is a huge one, more often than not, especially because of the isolation. The abuser might be the sole economic supporter of the family. The survivor might not have any knowledge or control of money or assets. They might go like, well, even if I were to leave, where am I going to live? I don't know where to go. Or worse, especially for Filipinos who are immigrants here in the US, it might be like, well, the abuser is a citizen and I'm not. Some safety issues could include like I said, like violence actually escalates when you're about to leave, or they might choose to retaliate and lie and say, well, actually, it's the survivor who's abusing the children, or filing police report, right? Or it could be like if the survivor is ill and they don't have insurance on their own. Social economic factors really could include, like we meant, like isolation, like the abuser systematically isolates them so that they don't get any support from outside. Or as Christine mentioned, they might be charming and highly regarded in the community. And so the survivor feels, well, no one's going to believe that they're abusive. Or if they're experiencing depression or anxiety or other mental health issues, it's barely enough psychological energy to kind of just keep on going, just to survive. And it feels overwhelming to try and do more than that. Or again, we've talked about that shame, not wanting others to know because of how all of the messages they've been told how shameful this is. And so what causes the shame? And it's really, these values and ideals that community or society might perpetuate. For example, women must be subservient to their husbands, or it's a sin to get divorced. Or you have to, keep the family together at all costs. Or divorced women and single mothers are really second-class citizens. And this I can attest to because I see this in my own rearing where, the woman is the emotional caretaker for everyone in the family. So everybody else's needs has to come before their own. But I want to make sure that we talk about like so we have to put accountability for what happens on the right people. So let's not blame the survivor for what's going on. So what are the people's what are the others' accountability in this? Or solely, we want to make sure that the abuser has accountability in this. So when we ask the question, why do partners abuse? The abuser's accountability, well, they might have witnessed or experienced family dynamics that supported abuse. So, or they experienced their own abuse without healing. We mentioned earlier, the children who've witnessed IPV are at the highest risk for either experiencing IPV again or being an abuser because they might not have healed. And so it's on them to work on that and heal, right? Or work on their healing so that they don't perpetuate it. And this is probably why IPV is increasing during COVID-19 is when abusers experience stress that drives this need for power and control more, then they tend to end up, imposing the power and control on what's accessible, like their partner. So, but we've mentioned about community. So our values and ideals. So what is society's accountability? What is our large, even if we're not the ones in an IPV relationship, what's our accountability in this? Well, family and community do not speak out against the abuse or try to help, right? We need to start talking about it so that it doesn't, so the message we're sending is it's not shameful and these people need help. And then also, I already talked about kind of those values and beliefs that support the use of or support partner violence. So when we talk about preventing IPV, so prevention is really addressing the root causes that make it possible. And so in this pyramid, it's a pyramid because, you know, the more you do the things at the bottom, then the less you'll probably need to do the things that go on top, right? And so really what's on top, this tertiary prevention, this is really when this is to lessen the long-term effects after IPV has already occurred. So this is police intervention when it's happened, counseling for the survivor or the family, and even the abuser, and shelter if they need to flee, right, to safety. The next level is really reducing the impact of IPV if it's already begun. So it's existing, but then we can still intervene. So it could be home visitation programs, and these usually are for families with children 0 to 5, meaning this is a really dangerous stage because the children are young, the survivor has nowhere to go, and they're generally isolated because they're caring for the children. And also support groups, being able to get support from each other. But I want to focus more really on primary prevention. How do we stop IPV before it even starts? And really it's about building community, knowing each other, kind of how, that police was saying, like, know your neighbor and speak out and help them. Like, you might be surprised how much you're helping them. Cultivating healthy relationships for yourself, model those relationships for your children. And then we talked about changing the culture, that paradigm of breaking the silence and shame surrounding IPV. So it's hard to talk about resources that are specific because it does also change from area to area, but we can talk about prevention strategies in general. And so teaching safe and healthy relationship skills. And aside from learning how to have healthy disagreements with your partner, part of it, like, you want to start teaching healthy relationship skills when they're young, or even learning how to cope with feelings and stress when you're young, so that when you grow older, you will be able to cope with the stress in a healthy way and not impose power and control on somebody else. You want to have healthy models, right? So abusers don't just come out of nowhere; they're cultivated. They develop. And so if in somehow they've been developed to be an abuser, we can also develop them to be not abusers. And so we want to make sure that particularly, and I say men and boys, but in general, because males are typically the abusers, but not all the time, that they would have, healthy role models, and encouraging bystanders like us, if we see something, to say something, and programs that focus on the family. So we also want to make sure that when they're young, or when it says here, disrupt the developmental pathways so towards partner violence, it's really getting in there early when they're having healthy parenting skills in early childhood, for parents with children, teaching healthy parenting skills so that they can also model healthy ways of stress and healthy relationships. And we want to make sure all environments are protective environments, whether it's school or work or the general neighborhood. This is important. We want to strengthen economic supports for families because economic concerns crosses a high amount of stress, which could lead to abuse. And really, we want to make sure that there's support for survivors in general to increase their safety. So it could be services that's directly to them, or accessible housing programs, and such. And it does. I think I want to highlight the part about treatment and support for survivors, including teen dating violence survivors, because like I said, it starts young, and if we can teach people to have healthy relationships when they're young, they'll carry this on until they're older. And if you're asking, well, how can I prevent IPV? Okay, this is great, but how can I do it? Well, I already mentioned, if you can be an active bystander. If you see something, you can say something. But I like these statements. It says here, like, as a person of faith, I can take part in an event that promotes equality and social justice. As a parent, I can talk to my children about healthy relationships. As a neighbor, I can get involved in my community to get to know the people around me. And as a teacher, I can model respectful behavior. As an employer, I can create, a safe workplace. And as a citizen or legislator, I can champion positive change. But specifically for Filipino survivors, in a study that was asked, when asked, what can you do to help me? Well, in that study, it was revealed that more than 95% of survivors turn first to their family and friends for help. So if you had a survivor, if you had somebody who was experiencing, they would probably approach you. And what would they want? So in the study, what they said, what would I want from you? Well, you want to listen and affirm. You want to validate their experience. You don't want to question their experience. You want to, if you have one, you want to share. If you have, you can share your own experience so that you're sharing. Basically, there's no shame in this. You don't want to hide the abuse, and you want to refrain from judgment, because, like earlier I mentioned, there might be reasons why somebody's staying in the relationship. Certain actions would be to connect them, stay connected with them, and in whatever way that's safest for the both of you. So texts, maybe visits, take them out, but make sure that you yourself are safe, because you have to remain safe in order to help them. And if they do want to leave and go towards you, you have to remain safe, right? You want to increase kind of that support network so that you can get more support, and you want to connect them with resources. So sometimes they might not know what to do. So it's there's certain barriers, like, I don't know how to get more income, so help me complete this paperwork. Or maybe going somewhere will get me kind of the help that I need. So even simple things like that. So the resources, again, are area specific, but I did want to mention kind of specific resources in the Filipino American community. So the Filipino Family Health Initiative really works to it's a study right now that's going on where Filipino parents are encouraged to participate in a parent education program to help strengthen these parent-child relationships. So we talked about how healthy parenting really contributes to the prevention of IPV. And there's also a couple of specific studies that's happened specifically with IPV. And so access intervention was conducted where a study was conducted where it's a group support kind of intervention that focused on work and vocational development, because it was, and particularly for Filipinos, because it was found out that one of the greatest barriers of leaving is really not being able to support themselves, financially or economically. And then there's going to be an upcoming study, hopefully, where providing the same kind of support to the survivor support network. They need support too. And if we can strengthen those support networks, then it will help support the actual survivor. And lastly, Tayo Help, the help desk, the online help desk that we has been mentioned earlier, that you can hopefully get a lot of information there, or at least be connected with people who can connect you to the right information about the kind of help that you need. And I think I'll stop there because I want to make sure that we have time for question and answers.
Thank you so much, Anna J. I'm just going to ask the speakers to switch on their video for the Q&A segment. All right, so we've received a few questions at registration that we'd like to make sure we respond to. And also we've gotten some questions in the chat. So I'm going to start with our first question. Let's see here. For all the panelists, what does justice look like in cases of IPV and domestic violence? And for Christine, do you believe you received justice?
Oh gosh. Well, thank you for asking that question. The easy answer is no. No, I don't think that I received the true justice that I, that I deserved. And unfortunately, I mean, it's just the fact that we're living in this world. It's a fallen world, in my opinion, and the justice system can only do so much. I mean, how can you bring justice to a situation like mine, where my life was endangered, where someone intentionally tried to cause me harm, and it just, I don't know what true justice looks like. Is it jail time? I mean, would that really help change the person, right? Like, my biggest hope for my abuser, and I've taken years to dwell on this, really, because I have a really hard time forgiving my abuser. And I know that that is a really important step in the healing process. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm a lot closer than I was several years ago. So I would say justice would look like having my abuser pay some sort of consequence in a way that affects him to the degree that he would really sit and consider what it is that he has done. Like Anna mentioned, domestic violence abusers don't just exist, right? Something happened to them, and something happened maybe in their childhood, or just, there's a background to it. It's complicated. Life is complicated. I understand that. But I just want there to be an opportunity for him to understand what it is and why it was such a harmful thing to do to another human being, and come to terms with himself, and try to try to get to a point in his life where he could look at that and say, I was wrong and I'm sorry, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but to this day, I would have to say that no, I don't think that I received the type of justice that I would have liked to see.
Thank you, Christine, for sharing that. Does anyone else want to add to that question? What does justice look like? Joyce?
Yeah, I'll chime in there. I know it's a difficult topic, and obviously as a prosecutor, like Christine said, I mean, this is something that I struggle with on a daily basis in my profession, is that I cannot make victims and survivors completely whole. What I look for in my position is to bring accountability, to bring rehabilitation, and to bring, hopefully, a platform where the victim feels heard and truth is brought out about their situation, and hopefully preventing any further victimization of that victim or any others. I mean, I think that's what we try to do, and we can only put a little dent in this tsunami of a problem. And like Anna J was talking about, this is so systemic and so deep that it really takes a holistic approach, and law enforcement and the criminal justice system is just one spoke in that wheel.
I want to add, though, I want to end with some hope. And I've always told this to survivors, sure, in the justice system or systemically, the cards might be stacked against you, but healing is not, or justice in the justice system is not required for healing. You can find your healing without it. Right? So even if you try and you work really hard and you go into the justice system hoping that you get the justice, and you don't, because the system is flawed and the cards are stacked against you, that shouldn't stop you from healing. There are other ways to kind of achieve that healing.
Thank you, Anna J. and Joyce, for adding. All right, for our next question, I work in healthcare and it has been a struggle to get attention to the increase in IPV. What are other healthcare providers and those in healthcare administration doing to address IPV through a healthcare system? I'm a healthcare provider, so I can answer briefly to that. So I'm fortunate to work in a federally qualified health center called Altamed General Pediatrics at CHLA, and our clinic incorporates behavioral health and primary care. We have a family support team made up of mental health providers, social workers who can connect families to resources. And then we have these prevention programs that Anna J referred to that focus on preventing child abuse through positive parenting. And, on an individual basis as a provider, we do try to ask open-ended questions of our families. When you and your spouse try to resolve conflict, what does that look like in your family, so that maybe we can try to identify some of those red flags. I don't know if any of the other speakers want to add to that.
I can add something. So when I started my empowerment video series, I actually not consulted. I told my doctors about it. And also as a journalist, I get a chance to talk to other doctors. And, so I've talked to doctors that help COVID patients. I've talked to my OB-GYN, like I've talked to my primary care, and it's very, it's like hush hush, right? So I tell them, and they've got HIPAA and things like that. So they can't really, share too openly. But when I let them know I'm doing something like this, the light bulbs went off in their heads. And they were just like, you have no idea how many like patients I have that need this type of like encouragement. Even my esthetician would tell me, like, there was this, customer or client, and she had a bruise, and I'm trying to help do her face, and it's everywhere. That's how common this is. And so I think the more one-on-one interaction I have with people in like the medical field and pass along like that resource, they are able to pass it on to their patients in kind of like an underground kind of a way, rather than making it like a public thing. Because when they do come in, it's the few minutes, like I said, right now with COVID, it's the few minutes that the victim survivor has with some sort of person that can help them. And so hopefully they take that, whatever resource they get, and they take advantage of it to where they can empower themselves and understand that, that they have a choice at the end of the day.
Thank you, Christine. So for our next question, can you tell us if DV victims who have outstanding criminal charges, for example, a victim who has a warrant or has not met probation requirements, are still able to obtain a protective order against an abuser? Would they be able to contact police and report DV without being arrested for pre-existing criminal charges?
Yes, you absolutely can obtain a protective order, regardless of whatever your conditions of probation, or if you have an open warrant. This is one of those situations where you want your own attorney. If I was a defense attorney and I had a client in this position, what I would do is I would file a motion to quash the warrant and list extenuating circumstances. Likewise, if you are not in compliance with probation, I would work with your probation agent, and they are trained, especially in domestic violence, for these considerations. And hopefully your probation agent will be able to work with you and do things by summons versus by warrant, and not jeopardize your position while trying to obtain protection from your abuser.
Thank you, Joyce. Our next question is, how do you help someone who doesn't realize that they are being abused? Yeah, that's hard.
I can probably speak to that in the sense that, people will have to come to that place on their, on their own. When we talk about abuse, it's about having choice and power and control, because normally it's taken away from you, right? So they have to come to that place. But hopefully what you don't want to happen is to add to the isolation or the disconnection that the abuse is causing. So we talked about kind of making sure that you maintain contact with them, or finding different ways where you can have that contact and be non-judgmental, so that it'll make it easier for them to get to that place themselves. um, and I think then that way, that's already, even just that is a simple way of supporting them.
And I'll add to that, while I was going through my abusive relationship, like I said, I mean, I felt isolation because a lot of my closest family and friends, I isolated myself from them. But there were a few still who, you know, they didn't judge me. And I think that was really important, because even though I didn't see it, because it's almost like you're seeing your life through rose-colored glasses, or whatever color it is when you're in that kind of a situation. You're in denial. That's what you're on. That's the filter. But they still did not judge me, and they were there, and they planted the seed in my mind that something was wrong. Even though I was denying it initially, like I held on to that, and when the seeds are being planted by dear friends, that you trust and have known longer than the abuser in most cases, then at some point, hopefully that those seeds will sprout and you will be able to see for yourself, like Anna said. But at the end of the day, you can't do anything for someone that doesn't want to be helped. You just gotta plant that seed and just be with them and be ready to help, I guess, when the time is right.
Thank you, Anna Jane, Christine. All right, so our next question is, how can I help raise awareness about domestic violence? Are there any internships available? And if so, with what organizations?
I know that for law enforcement prosecutors' offices, we do have internships as well as community-based programs in partnership with local domestic violence houses, as well as pro bono attorneys, and they're always looking for interns and volunteers to help assist our communities. So there's definitely lots of opportunity there. And like everyone has talked about today, this is such a difficult personal topic. And in just being present and acknowledging that there is a problem is being part of the solution.
So I've worked
you,
with
Joyce.
a nonprofit called Center for the Pacific Asian Family. That's just one of many nonprofits that exist in the LA area, as well as there's so many more, nonprofits and really, really helpful organizations throughout the country. Just Google, in your area, domestic violence organization, or, help. And I'm sure there will be organizations that pop up. There are a few on my website as well that I list as resources. But at the organization where I used to first volunteer and then work, I remember one of the most fulfilling things I did as a volunteer. They have internships too, by the way. But one of the most rewarding things I did was gift wrap Christmas presents for survivors that were living in shelters. And just looking at a room filled with gifts, and I had my family come over, I had my in-laws come over. It was like this thing, and it just made you feel, like you're doing something, to help. And also, if you are multilingual, I know a lot of the hotlines and, just organizations can use your help to translate documents. Like, for example, if someone's going to a doctor's office and they can't speak English, I've translated very simple phrases, like "it hurts here," or like "this happened to me," and so you're able to show that to the doctor and they're able to help you. So there's so many different ways you can help, either as an intern or as a volunteer at multiple organizations.
Thank you, Joyce and Christine. All right, this is going to be our last question. How can we reach out to Filipino fiancés, many of whom came here practically mail ordered and have such low expectations?
I think that, and I'm going to provide my slides with those resources. I think if people knew what their rights were as immigrants, as being here on fiancé visas, a lot of these individuals don't realize how much rights they have and how many recourses they do have in the law. So I think that by providing them some information can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I think this is also where community building is really important, and particularly for the Filipino community, where we do kind of group together and get that support from each other. I think if the survivor felt like, oh, I have a community backing me up, then they'll find more confidence to kind of be brave and go on their own and not feel compelled to stay, right? So
Thank you so much. All right. So thank you to all of our speakers today for sharing their stories and expertise with us, as well as to everyone in the audience for your participation and support in the campaign to stop domestic violence. If you have any questions after the event, please contact us at info@pgembassy-us.org or call the Philippine Embassy Assistance to Nationals and Violence Against Women hotline 202-769-8049. You may also submit an anonymous question on the Tayo Help Desk, and the link is right here. All right, maraming salamat po. Thank you very much, and happy holidays to everyone.